The studio lights burned bright as a young man in a simple black priest's robe stepped onto the stage. The audience murmured, "A priest, on Got Talent?" Some chuckled, others whispered doubts. But when he lifted the microphone and softly said, "I sing not for fame, but for faith," no one could have predicted what would happen next. By the end of his song, even the coldest hearts in the room would be in tears, including Simon Cowell himself. The stage lights felt blindingly bright as Father Miguel Santos, a 22-year-old Filipino priest from Cebu, stepped onto the massive Got Talent stage. His simple black cassock contrasted sharply with the glittering costumes and dazzling smiles of the contestants before him. The crowd murmured, curious yet doubtful. What was a priest doing here? Some audience members chuckled softly, whispering that maybe he'd blessed the stage instead of singing. Miguel's heart pounded in his chest, but his face remained calm, the same gentle calm he wore while leading prayers in his small, storm-damaged chapel back home. For years, he had sung not to impress, but to heal, for the sick, the lonely, and the children who found comfort in his voice during dark nights when typhoons cut the power and flooded their homes. His parish was poor, but his faith was rich. And now, that faith had brought him to the world's biggest stage. When Simon Cowell leaned forward and asked, "So, Father, what made you audition?" the young priest took a slow breath and smiled humbly. "I sing not for fame, but for faith," he replied. "If my song can bring hope to even one person watching tonight, then that's enough." A hush fell over the audience. Even Simon, who was known for his sharp remarks, simply nodded. The backing track began, the soft melody of "You Raise Me Up." Father Miguel closed his eyes, whispered a prayer, and took a deep breath. The first note that escaped his lips was clear, warm, and unshakably pure, like sunlight breaking through clouds after a storm. The laughter in the crowd faded instantly. His voice carried strength, peace, and something far greater, sincerity. Each word seemed to come from his soul, not his throat. He wasn't just performing a song, he was sharing a piece of heaven. As the camera panned over the audience, faces softened, eyes glistened, and a stillness filled the entire hall. In that moment, the world seemed to stop. It wasn't about talent anymore, it was about truth. By the time he reached the chorus, the audience no longer saw just a young priest, they saw a man whose voice had the power to heal hearts. And somewhere deep inside, Father Miguel knew, his prayer had already been answered. Folded hand sparkles. The first note had silenced the crowd, but as Father Miguel's song continued, something even more powerful began to unfold. His voice rose with the kind of emotion that words could never fully capture. It wasn't the polished performance of a trained pop singer, it was something far more profound, the sound of faith made flesh. Each lyric of "You Raise Me Up" poured from his heart like a prayer for the world. The way his voice trembled on certain notes wasn't imperfection, it was sincerity. It was the voice of someone who had sung through storms, who had stood before grieving families in candlelit chapels, who had buried his own fears in songs of hope. The audience sat frozen, unable to look away. A mother in the front row clutched her chest, her tears slipping silently down her face. A teenage boy who moments ago had been scrolling through his phone now leaned forward, eyes wide. Even the judges, hardened by years of performances, seemed uncharacteristically still. Simon Cowell's usual skepticism had melted into something softer. Beside him, another judge whispered, "It feels like he's not singing to us, he's singing for us." As the orchestra swelled, Father Miguel lifted his hands slightly, a gesture of offering, of surrender. Behind him, the screen glowed with golden light, as if the heavens themselves had joined his performance. The entire hall felt transformed, bathed in warmth and reverence. And though Miguel stood on one of the biggest stages in the world, in his heart, he wasn't in a competition, he was back home. He could almost see the faces of his parishioners, the orphans he cared for, the elderly he visited, the families who gathered in their broken chapel to hear him sing. He imagined their smiles, their faith, their gratitude. As he sang the final lines, "You Raise Me Up," to more than I can be." His voice cracked slightly, filled with emotion. It wasn't a flaw, it was truth. When the music faded, a sacred silence hung in the air. Then, slowly, the crowd rose to its feet. Applause thundered like rolling waves, and tears streamed freely. In that moment, Father Miguel's simple wish had come true. His song had lifted not just one person, but thousands. Red Heart musical notes. The applause thundered through the hall, but Father Miguel stood still, his eyes closed, hands clasped over his heart. He wasn't soaking in the praise, he was praying. For a moment, it felt as though heaven itself had descended upon the stage. The golden lights shimmered like candle flames, and the echoes of his final note lingered in the air, long after the music stopped. When he finally opened his eyes, he was met with something he had never expected: tears. Everywhere he looked, people were crying. Grown men in suits, children in the aisles, even the camera crew wiping their faces discreetly. It was as if every soul in the audience had been reminded of something sacred: love, loss, hope, forgiveness, all through one young priest's song. The first judge leaned forward, her voice trembling. "Father Miguel," she said softly, "I've heard thousands of singers, but I've never felt something like that. Your voice, it wasn't just music. It was healing." The crowd erupted in agreement, and Miguel smiled humbly, lowering his gaze. "Thank you," he said, his voice quiet. "I just wanted to share the peace that music gave me, because it saved me once." Simon Cowell tilted his head, intrigued. "Saved you?" he asked. Miguel took a breath. "When I was 16, I lost my family in a storm. I nearly lost my faith too. But one night, I started singing in the ruins of our church, not to perform, but to pray. That song carried me through the pain. And every time I sing now, it's to remind others that even in brokenness, beauty still exists." A hush fell over the hall. The weight of his words was heavier than any lyric, deeper than any melody. The audience wasn't just witnessing talent, they were witnessing testimony. Simon's expression softened completely. "Father," he said slowly, "you didn't just sing tonight. You ministered to us." The crowd rose to its feet again, clapping, cheering, crying. A woman shouted, "Bless you, Father Miguel," from the back. Cameras zoomed in on his face, calm, radiant, and full of grace. And though he stood under the brightest lights in the world, Miguel knew the truth in his heart: this wasn't his moment. It was God's. The applause roared like a wave that refused to fade, crashing again and again across the theater. Father Miguel stood frozen, his eyes glassy, his heart pounding so hard he could hear it in his ears. He never came to win, he came to share his faith through song, yet somehow, the entire world seemed to be holding its breath, waiting for what would happen next. The judges' panel sat in stunned silence. The first judge, still dabbing her eyes, finally managed to speak. "Father Miguel," she whispered, "you didn't just move us, you lifted us." The crowd cheered, voices echoing in unity: "Golden buzzer! Golden buzzer!" Simon Cowell, usually the hardest to impress, leaned forward, his elbows resting on the table. His gaze was intense, but not with criticism, with something close to reverence. "You know," he began, "in all my years on this show, I've seen technical perfection. I've seen stars, I've seen showmanship, but what you just did wasn't about any of that." He paused, his words hanging in the air like a promise. "You reminded us what it means to feel." The audience erupted again, clapping, shouting his name: "Miguel! Miguel!" Their voices rising like a choir. Simon smiled slightly, stood from his chair, and pressed his hand firmly against the golden buzzer. Collision boom. The stage exploded into a storm of golden confetti. The music swelled, lights flashed, and Miguel's hands flew to his face as tears spilled freely down his cheeks. He looked up, and for a moment, it was as if heaven itself was raining blessings upon him. Children in the front rows screamed with joy. The judges stood, applauding. Even Simon, the man known for his stern composure, was smiling from ear to ear. Miguel dropped to his knees, clutching the cross around his neck, whispering a prayer of gratitude. It wasn't about fame, nor victory. It was about grace, grace that had followed him from the broken walls of a small Philippine chapel to the grandest stage in the world. Simon approached the stage and extended his hand. "Father Miguel," he said, his voice warm, "you didn't just sing tonight, you gave us all a miracle." And in that golden glow, surrounded by tears, applause, and faith reborn, Father Miguel knew, this was never just a competition. It was a calling. Weeks passed after Father Miguel's breathtaking performance, but the echoes of that night refused to fade. The video of his audition had gone viral, spreading across continents, languages, and faiths. Millions watched in awe as the humble Filipino priest, with nothing but his voice and faith, moved an entire audience to tears. News anchors called it the performance that touched heaven, while comments online overflowed with gratitude and admiration. Yet for Father Miguel, life hadn't changed in the way most expected. He didn't move to Hollywood or chase record deals. Instead, he quietly returned home to his small parish in Manila. The chapel walls were still cracked, the pews still creaked, and the choir of children still sang off-key, but everything felt different. The people who once doubted, who once treated faith as routine, now came with tears in their eyes and hearts full of hope. Every Sunday, the church overflowed. Not because people came to see a celebrity, but because they came to feel again, to believe in something bigger than themselves. Miguel often stood at the altar, humbled, watching families hold hands and strangers pray side by side. In that unity, he saw the true miracle his song had created. One afternoon, as the sun dipped low, a young boy approached him after Massachusetts. The child clutched a worn guitar, its strings uneven and body cracked. "Father," the boy said shyly, "I want to sing like you someday." Miguel knelt to the boy's level, smiling gently. "Then sing," he said. "Not to be famous. Not to be praised. Sing because your heart needs to be heard. And when it is pure, the world will listen." Word of his humility spread even further. Invitations came from around the world, to sing, to speak, to inspire. But Miguel always gave the same reply: "If it brings people closer to kindness and faith, I will go." Months later, standing on another stage, not for a show, but a global charity event, Father Miguel sang once more. No cameras, no judges, no golden buzzer this time. Only thousands of people holding candles, their faces glowing with peace. His voice rose through the night, calm and steady, a reminder that miracles aren't born from fame or power. They come from faith, humility, and the courage to share one's light. And though the stage lights faded, the world continued to listen. His voice had become timeless.